I was reminded this week about a time I had when I was in high school. And I was in 11th grade, and I was just one of those students that if something was taught well, I didn't want to study. I didn't need to go home and read for myself. I just got it. I didn't really hardly take any notes. It's just, if it was explained well, it was just, I attained it. So I could do that, which is also one of the reasons why I wasn't really doing well in biology and then later on in chemistry, because neither my biology teacher nor my chemistry teacher could teach worth a flip. That idea of those who can do and those who can't teach, I am absolutely positive that both my biology teacher and my chemistry teacher could do, but they certainly could not teach, right? So I came out of there with like C's. It's the only time I really got C's, but I came out usually with A's, A minuses, B pluses, really high B's. Usually that's how it was. So I was just scooting by. Everything was great until the day before my final exam in my 11th grade grammar and lit class. When Miss Williams came to me as I was about to leave and said, "Chris, I just want you to know, if you don't get an A on your final, you fail my class." I could feel my heart drop. I am absolutely sure my eyes were like huge because I thought I had an A. I could not figure out how I did have an A. But her words were, if you don't get an A on your final exam, you will fail my class. So what did I do? I went home and took my literature book, and for 6 straight hours, I studied. The only time I didn't study was just to go and get me a plate of food so that I could come back to the dining room table, eat while I was studying. I hated reading, but I read every stinking story in that literature book and answered every stinking question. And when I got back to school the next day, I took that exam. The next week, I got that exam back. On Monday, I got the exam back. I made a 96 on my final exam. I was so happy. About another week later, I get my report card. I immediately look, what in the world did I come out? Please let me have come out with like a C minus if I could. Nope, guess what I had? 92. A 92! I'm not a math major. But I can just about guarantee that a 96 on a final exam is not going to bring a failing grade all the way up to a 92. She lied to me. And I went and I confronted her about it. You lied to me. Yes, I did. Why did you lie to me? You know what her reason was? She said, I know that you are capable of much more, and I wanted to prove to you and to myself how much you were capable of doing. That's a stupid reason. No, I'm just kidding. Right? She wanted me to be ready for the exam. As ready as I possibly could be. And I was. There's a joke that goes around. Why is it that old people read their Bibles all the time? You know the answer? Because they're studying for the final exam. Right? Terrible theology. Terrible theology. But there's something to it in the fact that as we read our Bibles, we become more prepared for heaven. We are ready when it comes to heaven. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to see our Master's will for our lives, so that we may be ready for heaven, that we may be ready for the kingdom. This morning we're going to look at Jesus and the fact that he wants his people to be completely ready for his return. And so he gives them 2 parables that instruct them as to his expectations. And I got to tell you real quick, they're hard parables. They're hard pills to swallow, especially the second one. So just be prepared for that. Because the first parable, that is geared towards servants, towards the servants at home. The second parable, that is geared towards the servant leaders of the home. So you've got your servants of the home, and then you've got your servant leaders of the home. So if you will, please stand with me for the honor of the reading of God's word. We're going to be looking at Luke chapter 12, starting at verse 35, going to verse 48. Stay dressed for action, and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in the second watch or in the third and finds them awake, blessed are those servants. And know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Peter said, Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for all? And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom his master will set over his household, to give them their portion of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom the master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set himself over all his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, my master is delayed in coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and to drink and to get drunk, when the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he does not know, and will cut him into pieces and put him with the unfaithful. And that servant who knew the master's will, but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. Thank you. You may be seated. So that first parable that Jesus tells is dealing with the servants of the home. Jesus is instructing his disciples that the servants of the home must be ready for the master's return. The first way that the servants are supposed to be ready is that they're supposed to dress themselves for the master's return. They're supposed to be dressing themselves for service. What it really says is that they are supposed to gird their loins. That's them being ready. Typically what would happen, especially in fancier households, is that they would be walking along and they would have their long robes on. That's what the servants would wear. They would wear these long robes. It wasn't really great for, getting down on your knees and scrubbing or sweeping or dusting and that kind of thing, right? It wasn't really that great for that. So what servants would often do when nobody was around, when it was their job to tutor, or it was their job to clean and that kind of thing, or to prepare dinner, they would actually take the back of their robes, they would scrunch it up real quick, they would throw it through the middle of them, bring it up, and then put it down in a belt. And basically they formed what? What would we call these today? Shorts. They would make shorts out of them. Or pants if they were really long, or maybe culottes. I don't know. Those are so hip and stylish, right? That's what they would do. So they were prepared. They were ready to actually do the service. Jesus says, you need, guys, right? Guys, he's talking to his disciples, right? You need to be ready to work. You need to put your work clothes on. So you're ready when the master comes home. Anyone who follows after Jesus is not called to laziness, called to service. And certainly not everybody has the same job. Not everybody is called to be the same servant. Not everybody is called to do the same type of work. Each servant has been gifted in the household of God. And Paul makes this very clear in 1 Corinthians. He used the analogy of a body, but the idea is the same, right? If we go to 1 Corinthians 12:14, for the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing? Where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. Same thing with the service. Same thing within the church, right? That's the idea that Paul is getting to, that we need each other in the church. Each of us have been gifted in various ways within the church. That is exactly what Jesus is talking about when he is talking about those servants of the household. We are the household. We are also servants within the household. And we are to be serving as servants in the household. Every servant has a job to do. Some servants might cook, some might clean, some might tend to the fire, some might teach the children. Who knows? There are a ton of different jobs that anybody could do. But together they make up the household. And together they are to be doing the will of the master as they are serving the family together. Jesus said that each of his followers needs to be ready in this way to do the job that is set before him or set before her. So the first way to be ready is to be dressed for action. The second is to keep the lamp burning. In other words, we are supposed to be ready by staying awake, by staying alert. That's what he goes on to say. So it's not really the idea that we are, we're dressed for action, and the lamps are burning, but we're just going to sit around and do nothing, kind of sit at the table and just kind of put our arms up and just, chit-chat while we're doing it. That's not what Jesus is talking about. That's not what Jesus is wanting us to do. The idea is to be ready to serve and have your lamps burning so that you can serve, that you can see what you're doing. We're supposed to be doing the work of the household. We are his workmanship, Paul says. Ephesians chapter 2, we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So this parable here that Jesus is giving is about a master who comes home from the wedding. The weddings in Jewish times could last up to 7 days. They weren't always 7 days, but they could last for 7 days. Sometimes they lasted 4, sometimes they lasted 5, 6. A lot of times they lasted 7. It was a time to rejoice with people. But the idea is that they could last for however long, and you have no earthly idea if the master is gone to the wedding, how long he's going to be gone. Could be 4 days, could be 7 days. Who knows? We have no idea when he is actually going to even get back. So we need to make sure that we are always being prepared for the master to return. We always need to stay alert. Now, most of us have probably experienced a time where we were standing at somebody's house and we were knocking on their door, or maybe like ring. This is when ring a doorbell, but you don't hear the doorbell go off. Have it ever happened to you? And you're not sure if it's just a really quiet doorbell, so you didn't hear the doorbell go off, or if the doorbell itself isn't actually working at all. And so you just kind of stand there. At least I do. I stand there in angst. Should I knock? Is that impatient? Should I just wait a couple of minutes, see if they actually come? You guys do this, or is this just me? Okay. So ring the doorbell. Don't hear it. You just stand there, just waiting. After a couple of minutes, you try maybe just to make sure. I've typically gone to now because I hate that whole feeling of angst. I'll ring the doorbell. I take a note from like UPS. I'll ring the doorbell and knock right at the same time, right? That way, hopefully they can hear something going on. And then you hear shuffling, which means they're about to come answer the door. But they don't. Ever happen? They don't come. Now it's like, did they look out the window and see it was me and they don't want to talk to me, and so they're trying to be as quiet as they can, and I just accidentally overheard them? Right? So then you knock again, and finally they open the door. But now you're just feeling like an idiot. Because maybe they didn't hear you. Or maybe they did, and you forced them to come to the door and meet you, and they didn't want to meet you, right? So imagine that, right? I mean, that's frustrating. That's really annoying. Now imagine it was your own house and nobody answered the door to your own house. You might be wondering why in the world somebody would have to answer the door for the guy anyway. It's his own house. He should just walk right in. Time frame confused with our time frame, right? The idea of key and knob and knock and all that stuff, that wasn't a big thing back then. The servants were right for shutting the door, and then they would put this big, beam across the door to keep it from being open. So somebody was going to have to, from the inside, take the beam away so that whoever it was on the outside could come. And Jesus is saying that this this master coming home from the wedding, he's looking to come inside. It's been a long, tiring week. He wants to come in. It's his own house. He should not have to stand on the outside of his own house. Does this remind you of anything? It's not going to be up here. Let's go together. Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. This is to the church of Laodicea. So it is a church. It is the household in Laodicea. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. It's his own house. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he with me. How long would the master of the house need to knock before the door is open? Shouldn't be too long, because the servants in the house should be ready. They should be dressed for action. They should have their lamps burning so that they are ready at the moment that they hear a knock at the door. That beam is being moved away and the door is opening up for their master. To welcome him, to show how much they care, to show how much they love their master. They should be inside, buzzing around, making sure everything is ready for when their master gets home so that he can come home to a clean house and maybe even to a meal to eat. Maybe if you've had kids, maybe this has actually happened to you. Maybe your child is feeling extra outgoing. And so they decided that without even being told, they're not just going to clean their room or they're not just going to clean the living room. They are going to clean that room extra special just for you. Ever happen? Our kids did it. Maybe we have the perfect kids. I don't know, right? Probably you guys have had that at some point. Kids decide to be extra special. They want to do something extra, right? Maybe they instead they baked you a cake or something like that, or made you some cookies or something like that, right? And they just wanted to do something special. Maybe you were gone, coming back from a trip, or from a retreat, or from a conference or something like that, right? And you're coming in, or maybe it's just been you come back from work or what have you, and they're just anxious to see you, so that before you even get to the door, they're like opening up the door. They can't wait to see you. They give you the hugs, and they want to show you all that they have done just for you, just because they cared, because they love you. What beautiful, wonderful children to have missed you like this. They couldn't wait to see you. They wanted you to have a clean house, a clean room, dinner, something. Maybe all of the above, right? You feel loved, you feel special, feel appreciated, feel honored. They were ready for you. That's what Jesus says it should be like. We ought to be getting ready for the work and looking anxiously for him to return. But then he says something completely unexpected. He tells them that the master is going to reverse roles with the servants. Those servants who are ready and open the door for him, that master is going to have those servants sit down, recline at table, and the master will put on the servants' gears, the servants' clothes, the attire. and in turn will serve the servants. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone will open the door to me, I will come in, and we will eat together. You with me with you, serving. They get to sit down and relax and enjoy a meal prepared by their own master. What a blessing that would be. Can you imagine the master, Jesus himself, coming and saying, well done, let me serve you. You sit down, you've done enough. So don't think that this has nothing also to do with what he's already said in the previous text, what we looked at last week. Because there he says, hey, don't worry about your food. Don't worry about where you're going to eat next, what meal you're going to have. Don't worry about your drink. Don't worry about those kinds of things. And then he says, you just seek the kingdom first. Seek the kingdom first. And God, it is God, your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Here we see Jesus saying, take care of the house. Be about the house. Make sure it's ready when I come. The master, the king, when I come and I return, I will make sure that you actually get to sit and relax, and I will serve you for those who are ready. The master faithfully repays the servant for his faithful service. And then Jesus kind of switches gears a little bit because the stress is still the same. Stressing the same point that we need to be ready, even if that means that we need to stay awake long into the night. Right? The master gets back. He talks about the second or third watch of the night. That means that he could get back anywhere. We don't even know what day he's getting back because of the wedding. But he could get back anywhere between he's like, even if it's between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., be ready. That's the second and third watch. That's about the time frame of the second and third watch. The point is to be ready. And he says, be ready as a man who knew that a thief was coming. That's how ready we ought to be. That a thief was coming to break into his house, to steal his stuff. I mean, I don't know anybody that is more ready than Kevin McAllister. Some of you know who Kevin McAllister is. From Home Alone, the movie Home Alone from 1990. I mean, that guy was ready. He heard that some thieves were going to break into his house, and he was prepared. They did not get a thing out of his house. That's what we call prepared, right? That's how we're prepared we are to be. We are to be ready for the thief to come. The thief would break in, and that we would be there waiting for him. The cops ready. Right? We typically do this already. We don't even know if a thief is coming, but most of us probably already have Ring doorbells so that we can actually see when somebody's coming up to our house. Or even Blink or the other rings, right, that go around the house, that we have video cameras all over the place. Some of us might even have the video cameras in our living room so that, if we had like little children, right, and that we want to make sure that our children are safe from the nanny or what have you, right, the little nanny cams kind of thing, right? We got all these things to make sure that our house and our family is secure. We already do this without anybody even knowing that somebody's breaking in or doing anything. How much more if we actually heard and knew that they were coming? She says, that's how ready we ought to be. We need to be that ready. But if we're not ready for Jesus to come, if we're not ready for the Master to come, why are we not ready? What's holding us back? If we're not serving in the household in some capacity, why? We need to ask ourselves, why are we not serving? Is it simply because we never even realized that we were supposed to serve? Is it because we knew that we should, but we're just absolutely refusing to do so? Is it because there's so much in our lives already? Is it because of the leadership? We can't because of leadership? That takes us to the second parable. It's not only the servants, but the servant leaders of the servants that need to be ready as well. Jesus gives a promise of blessing to the servants. He actually says it twice, that how blessed are those servants. And it's not that he doesn't give a blessing, he doesn't promise a blessing to the servant leaders, but he also gives a very harsh warning to the servant leaders who are not ready for his return. In the first parable, Jesus uses the word doulos for slave, for servant. Right? Servant is a legitimate translation. In this one, though, the second parable, he addresses are you ready for this word? Right? Oikonomos, right? Oikonomos. That's what he uses. That's the word he uses. Oikos, which means house, and then namein, which actually means manager, the manager of the house. It basically means that this is not the owner of the house. This is the slave in charge of the other slaves. This is the servant in charge of the other servants. We get actually the word economy from oikonomos. Okay? It's not the father, not the husband, not the man of the house. He is the servant in charge over the household, though. Think about Joseph in the Old Testament. He gets sold to Potiphar. Where does he rank in Potiphar's household? Is he not number one? He is the man in charge of the other slaves, though he is a slave himself. When he gets thrown into prison, where does he rank among all the prisoners? Number one. He is the oikonomos of the prison. Ultimately, he goes up into Egypt, right? And he goes and stands before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is the man of the house of the entire nation of Egypt. Joseph, though, what is he? He's the oikonomos of Egypt. He takes care of it all. So we're not just talking about any old servant here. We're talking about the servant of servants. He is the servant leader over the servants. And so here's Peter, and he asks the question. He says, Peter said, verse 41, he says, Lord, parable for us or for all? And it seems at first that Jesus ignores Peter's question because he just starts telling a different parable. But the parable is in reference to his question in the first place. Because the first parable, well, that's for any old follower of Jesus. Those are the follower of Christ. Those are the disciples. Anybody that believes in Christ, anybody that believes in Jesus, that's what that parable is for. But this parable is for them as disciples, as apostles. This is what they really need to make sure that they're listening to, because they are the servant leaders of the servants themselves. They are the oikonomos of the local congregation. And most scholars would agree, and I would agree with them, that there is no such thing as a lineage of apostolic succession. Right? There's nothing like that. But it has moved from the apostles to the pastors. That same idea of the oikonomos has moved to the pastor. Look with me, if you will. 1 Timothy chapter 3, it'll be up here, but 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. See that word overseer? Not hard to miss, right? That's the Greek word episkopos. Epi means upon, skopos, where we see, right? We look at through a microscope or a telescope. It means so. Epi means upon, or over, and skopos just simply means to see. So it makes sense, right? Overseer. It's where we get the word episcopal from. The Episcopal Church comes from this word episkopos. The Latin version for this word, epi, meaning over, is the word super. The word for see in Latin is the word visor, right? As in somebody that wears a visor, right? You put those two words together, what do you get? a supervisor. That's what the pastor is supposed to be. He is to be the supervisor. He is the oikonomos, the manager. He is in that position. And you may be going, Chris, I don't see it really. I mean, I get it, but aren't those two, couldn't they be separate things? Titus 1:7. For an overseer, as God's steward, guess what that word is? Oikonomos. Same word, manager. The overseer is the manager. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or drunkard or violent or greedy or for gain. Oikonomos. God's manager. And I bring all of this up because I think that it's really important for us to understand what Jesus expects of his managers, of his pastors, overseers, elders, however you want to call it. Because he expects a lot more of them. We are to be the epitome of what it means to be a servant. His office, by way of his office, he is to be the leader of the local church. He is to guide them. He is to make sure that they are serving in their capacity. He's to make sure that the work of the master is actually getting done. Right? This is why I ask you, if you're not serving, if that's because of the leadership, then there's something wrong there. Because the leaders, the servant leaders, ought to be helping you to serve in the household. So maybe they're not being faithful. Maybe we're not being faithful. Maybe we're not being wise in what we are supposed to be doing. It could simply be absolutely also that maybe perhaps your gifting isn't where you think that it is. That's also another way, right? But we as servants, we as servant leaders, we as pastors, we as managers, we are supposed to do what is best for the church. Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 12. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers. Shepherds, that word for pastor, right? The shepherd teacher, to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up the body of Christ. So what's the job of the shepherd teacher? What's the job of the pastor? Of the manager? What's his job? To equip the saints for the work of ministry. His job, my job, Matt's job, is to make sure and see to it that the servants are ready for the master to return. Therefore, that the servants are serving. He's to make sure that the servants know how to serve and that they have what they need to serve. So he's supposed to be the leader, but he's also supposed to be their servant. Notice what the master expected from the manager. He also expects from the manager to feed his servants. In this case, certainly Jesus uses food as an allegory for his word. Remember when Peter was being restored, and he says, Peter, do you love me? Of course, you know that I love you, Lord. And then what does he tell him? Feed my sheep. Feed my lambs. One of the main jobs is to serve the church. Serve the servants by the word of God. So we lead, making sure that the servants are serving, making sure that the servants have what they need in order to serve. We lead them through the service itself, and we also then serve the servants by making sure that they have plenty to eat. They have nourishment to keep their strength. And this is what Jesus expects to find us as pastors doing when he returns. And if we do it, we are rewarded greatly. He will set us over all of his possessions, kind of like Joseph. Joseph was faithful with Potiphar. He was faithful in the prison. And then he was faithful ultimately even with Pharaoh. And Pharaoh put him over all of the kingdom, all of his possessions. This is what Jesus has said, that when the master returns and he finds his servant leader, he finds his manager serving well, sky's the limit. Loves to do it, loves to give. But what happens if that manager sloughs off? What happens if that manager, if that pastor just decides to take it easy? What if he takes advantage of his position? Oh, I'm a leader. I don't have to really do a whole lot. What happens if he really just wants to take all the glory but not any of the responsibility? He says he starts to become abusive to his own servants. He begins to believe his own hype. I mean, he's the guy in charge. He's the man. Whatever he says goes. In the parable, he is physically abusive to the servants. And that can happen in the pastorate, but what more often happens in the pastorate is more likely to be verbal abuse, spiritual abuse, emotional abuse. It's the same word that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians, when he says that we who see our younger brothers and we cause them to stumble, we are abusive. We are abusing them. Those who have weaker consciences, making them stumble. He says that that's what a person can do. Whatever it is that's causing that person to lose their faith and fall into sin, that is the abuse. Same word, same idea. If a pastor is doing that which is causing others to lose their faith, he is being abusive. I'm not going to pretend like I've never done it. I'm sure I have. But would that Andy Stanley would just realize, I mean, my heart breaks for Andy Stanley, that he would just realize how abusive he is being toward his own congregation. But he just, that he would know what the Lord requires of him. And that if he doesn't get back on track, there is disaster awaiting for him. Would that none of us would forget that. We all can have that tendency to do what Stanley is doing now. But by the grace of God. In the parable, the oikonomos, rather than making the servants of the household fed, strengthening them, he's feeding himself. In fact, he's getting drunk rather than taking care of them. And here's the thing. Of comfort, great comfort should be of great comfort to the servants out there. Jesus does not take lightly the neglect and the abuse of his servants. Not at all. Not even a little bit. There is severe punishment for those who would do so. Remember Jesus, totally different place, and in fact, I don't even know if it's in Luke, actually, but you remember that Jesus says, hey, anybody that causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for them to have a millstone having wrapped around their neck and thrown into the sea than to cause them to stumble. Same kind of concept here. It would be so much better for us to never even existed, for us to have met some untimely demise, some horrific demise, than to be caught abusing his people, his servants. We need to understand that the words here, male and female servants, again, not the same words that we see in the first parable. In verse 45, that's not the same word as the servants above. They are in reference to the same people, but he's using a different word. The word that he uses literally means male or female child. It can be a term for personal servant of a master or a mistress, but typically those are still young children. And if the manager abuses them, he will meet with severe fate. Look at verse 46. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and an hour when he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the unfaithful. And James wasn't joking, was he, when he says that not many of you should become teachers, my brothers? For you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. That's a lot stricter. Jesus expects faithfulness from his servant leaders. Unfaithfulness is unacceptable to Jesus. And I'm really not even sure why the ESV or the CSB uses the word as unfaithful. I think that it should be better translated as unbelieving. Those who are found this way are cast out with the unbelievers. They are cut into pieces and have their portion with the unbeliever because they have proven themselves not to be a believer in Christ themselves by how they are treating their own congregation. They've proven themselves to be unbelievers, and therefore they have their place with unbelievers. There's little chance that a manager would not understand or not know what the master has wanted. There is a little bit of a chance there. It is possible, but it's very small. And Jesus says in verse 42 that the manager must not only be faithful, he also has to be wise. That word wise there in verse 42, it means discerning, it's thoughtful. It's not the same word that we would think of with Sophia. It's a different word. Sophia just means wisdom. Like when we think of Proverbs, we think of Sophia. We think of wisdom. He's like, no, that's not how it is. It is wise. We are supposed to be wise. We are thoughtful. We are sensible. We take what the master wants, and then we go out and we do it in the ways that we know that the master, that are in line with the master's character. Think about the man who received 5 talents, and he goes out and he invests it and he does all this stuff with it, and he comes back with 5 more talents, and the guy with 2, and he comes back with 2, and the guy with 1, not wise at all, but very foolish. He knew that the master wanted something in return, but instead, what did he do? He buried it. Dumb. Not very sensible at all. Jesus says, I need my masters, or excuse me, my managers to not just be faithful in understanding what I expect, but sensible in knowing how to do it. And the more that one knows and understands, the more that one is going to have to give an account for whether or not he or she abided by the knowledge that they've been given. So as we finish this text this morning, we once again come across some pretty hard pills to swallow. I think we did last week. I think we did this week. But there can be tremendous blessings. Blessings are promised to the faithful. Jesus blesses the faithful and ready servants 3 times. Verse 37, verse 38, verse 43. Blessed are those servants who are faithful. Jesus emphasizes in these parables how blessed it is to be ready for his return. We must be ready for our master to come. Even if it seems like he's not coming even into the 3rd watch of the night. It just seems so long. When's going to be here? As Peter said, the Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish. He wants to find us faithful. He wants to find us as the believers, as those faithful believers, faithful servants, but that all should reach repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved in the earth, and the work that are done on it will be exposed. There's the service. We're going to see. He's going to expose our service. Since all these things are thus to be dissolved, here's the question. What sort of people ought you to be in the lives of holiness and godliness? We ought to be about the master's work. And for the servant leaders, your pastors here, we are to be about leading well and serving you. We are to be faithful and wise in understanding the will of the master and then carrying it out in line with the master. And I want to read Hebrews 13:17 quickly. The writer of Hebrews says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. I don't bring this out to go, hey, obey, submit, right? That's not what I'm doing. But really to show you the idea of the pastor's responsibility. This is what we are going to be called be called on account of your souls. No other job has that responsibility.